This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Welcome to another episode of the HR in Review podcast. I'm the guest host today, Bill Banham, and my guest joining me today is Kirstin Furber, Director of People at Channel 4. Kirstin is responsible for all of Channel 4's HR and people functions, leading a strategy to enable and underpin a dynamic culture that fosters creativity, diversity, inclusion, and innovation. Kirstin joined Channel 4 from Kantar Consulting, where she was Chief People Officer, working across the consulting and global divisions to build a culture of growth. Prior to that, Kirstin held senior roles at several prominent media companies, including 20th Century Fox, Discovery, and more recently as People Director for BBC Worldwide, where she spent over 7 years developing the organization's culture to support and deliver a global growth strategy. Kirstin, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show today.
Well, thank you very much. And now we've worked out the time zones, good morning.
Good morning to you too. Okay, so beyond my wee introduction there, Kirstin, why don't you take a minute or two and tell our listeners a bit more about yourself and your role over at Channel 4?
Absolutely. So I have been at Channel 4 for nearly 2 years. It's a very exciting place, really, in the middle of lots of change that's going on the industry. And I know I've spoken to one of your colleagues before. One of the things that I'm very passionate about from an HR profession is how we can really create the right environment so people can do their best work. So culture, people is a core pillar for Channel 4's success. We had a very good, successful year last year. And I blog and write a lot about being human at work, because I believe that is something that is just so critical for us at the moment, given all the challenges that we have in the marketplace, whether we're getting over the global pandemic, I'm going to say hopefully getting over it, the hybrid working. We now have cost of living challenges around supply chain. So there's lots of external factors. So having the right environment so people can do their best work is really important.
This edition of HR in Review is a special guest episode brought to you in partnership with our friends at the North American-based HR Chat podcast, a podcast focused on interviews with HR, talent, and tech experts.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so as part of my homework ahead of this interview today, Kirstin, I was reading around past interviews that you've done, one of which was a great interview, by the way, was with the HRdirector.com. And here's a direct quote from you. Channel 4 has always been a force of change, a box shaker, and very progressive. But for that to be allowed to happen, the HR infrastructure must support it. I knew I had to bring all of my experience to the task in hand. So my question for you is, what have been the biggest challenges that you've faced at Channel 4 so far? I believe you joined in 2020. And how have you been keeping Channel 4's people happy, motivated, and progressive in their collective outlook? And perhaps as part of that answer, you could include some discussion of the big news from this year, of course, which is the privatization of Channel 4.
So, gosh, there's a lot in there. Bill, where'd you start? I think the one word that I would say that I believe resonates with everyone, whether you're an employee, whichever profession, is the speed of change. The speed of change is so quick, and particularly in the broadcasting industry, given that in the pandemic, the big focus, well, we had all the time, didn't we, to watch a lot of TV, which was fantastic. And it really meant there was very much a big focus to digital. What was really good about Channel 4 is ahead of that, the strategy had already been to start really focusing, leading from let's put digital first, so that we could really support our remit, getting out to consumers in terms of the fascinating, challenging content that we provide, and also how we support the indie community. So in terms of when you've got a backdrop of lots of change going on anyway, your industry is changing, we've got a very, very clear remit and purpose, and that really provides the bedrock for what we can do from a people and culture perspective to start to build and evolve in terms of that work. So the challenge, I would say, overall is change. Change is difficult. And it's really about locking into the purpose and the remit continuously in terms of how we move that forward. And then how can we look at really supporting our employees, but also how do we support people outside of the UK as well? So I'll give you one example, because I always think it's good to provide some examples. So we have very active employee representation groups, and really partnering with those groups in terms of what is on people's minds, what do we need. And for women who were very active representation groups, saw that there was certainly a gap and awareness that needed to be created and support around menopause. And then more recently, in the last 6 months, around pregnancy loss. And having that raised across the organisation, putting policies in place so that people are supported and managers can support employees, and then taking that outside of Channel 4 has been something that has been very much welcomed. And I think is a really great example in terms of how can you support that environment for people who are going through different things so they can do their best work.
Why not subscribe to the premium version of HR in Review? You'll get ad-free content, early and extra episodes and more. Even better, although it's the premium edition, it's absolutely free. Sign up at hrreview.co.uk/podcast.
Okay, wonderful. I just want to tease a bit more out of you on that answer in terms of the impact of privatisation, the privatisation of Channel 4. What does that mean for the culture at Channel 4?
Bill, you did ask me that question. I didn't include it in my very long answer. So in terms of, I think everyone is aware, the government has announced the possibility of Channel 4 being privatised. Now, those conversations are going. There is obviously discussions and requirements that need to go through government. Where we are as an organisation, we are here still to deliver on our remit, and why Channel 4 was brought together in the first instance and has been very, as I said, successful in the last 12 months, and we continue to be. So from a people perspective, it really goes back to, and again, I talked about this a lot with colleagues and peers. If you've got a very, very clear purpose, which Channel 4 does in terms of its remit, that galvanises employees more than anything else. And our remit is still there. It's still as it needs to be, even if there's lots of conversations around privatisation. So it's really dialing that up even more and giving that sense of how important that is to deliver within the organisation and for the greater good. And I think we also hear externally people are very supportive of that. So culturally, it just means dialing up that purpose and that remit even more, given all the noise that goes on around what this could mean, because we don't know. So it's very much delivering against that.
Okay, so there's still a wee bit of uncertainty at the moment then, Kirstin. What does that mean for you as someone who leads the charge of the people function, of keeping people all rowing in the same direction and whatnot? What additional challenges are there for a people leader when there is uncertainty within an organisation?
Well, again, uncertainty is always going to be there. And I think the last 24 months for all of us has meant uncertainty. And what does that mean from what can the people function do? So from my perspective, it very much is, there's always going to be uncertainty, whether that's what the future of the organisation is, or what does that mean from an economic or political standpoint. But having a clear purpose really then requires very, very clear communication. Clear in terms of, I think we're all familiar with, I'm going to call it people infrastructure around a performance cycle, which is very much making it human. So everyone being very, very clear, and this is what I've certainly been focused on, and it may sound quite simple, but when we're working in a hybrid way, is everyone really, really clear what goals and objectives that we're working on to deliver the strategy, to deliver the remit. So very, very big focus in terms of ensuring everyone is clear, having that regular feedback mechanism, pushing that, provide role modeling that as well, and then providing the support and the development around that. So it's really a sort of a very much a holistic people strategy with all those different elements. but dialing up very, very strongly communication in a number of ways, whether that be like we're talking today, we can't see each other. Some people like to meet in person. How do you get all of those messages and consistent messages right through the organization and ensure it's a two-way conversation is where that's really going to form.
If you enjoy the HR in Review podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star rating in iTunes or in your podcast app of choice. This helps others find us and grow our community of HR and related professionals.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, far too many of us have had this feeling of dread on a Sunday evening ahead of a new work week. Certainly in my early career, I experienced a bit of that, and it's not fun. It's not nice. And if there are ways to alleviate or even stop that, that's terribly important. And I mention that because you're kind enough to join us as a speaker at the Disrupt HR London Summit happening on July 6th at the Royal Institution. It's an evening event. It happens between around 6 and 9 p.m. Be there or be a rectangle, listeners. And your session is called Banishing Sunday Night Blues. I'd love for you now to take 2 or 3 minutes and tell listeners a bit about your session and some of the hoped for learning outcomes.
Definitely. Well, Bill, as you've said, I have, and I've spoken to many people of this. Your weekend starts to maybe tail off in the afternoon as you're starting to think about work and maybe having some concerns around what your working week is going to be like. So really us is getting into this whole thing around, am I starting Monday in the best place, or am I starting it not feeling that I'm able to do the best work I can do? And I think that can mean for leaders or employees, what's the impact that's having on yourself, the organization, and the broader economy. So I was very I've started to blog quite a bit around it and noticed that this was resonating with quite a few people around, is there a wellness strand here? Is there a productivity strand here? And then layer on hybrid working as well. And I have been in conversations and now in partnership with Exeter University to really get underneath this, because I think sometimes it's very easy to say, yes, I've got this feeling, but what is some of the hard data that we can really establish of, is this something? How does it find itself? What are the consequences? And what can we do about it? And the purpose of where we will lend this research, which is about 3 or 4 phases over a period of a year. We're just about to close the first part of the research, is to really come up with some pragmatic and practical outcomes that individuals and leaders can do to really reduce, if not banish, the Sunday night blues, so that we can really start our working week in the best way possible. And that's what I'm going to talk through on the session at Disrupt HR.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a heck of a challenge, right? The format for the Disrupt HR events is 20 slides and 5 minutes. What kind of challenges does that present for a speaker, Kirstin?
Well, I think that the challenges is there's a lot of information to get across in a short period of time. And the positive thing is, I really believe we have so much information thrown at us. So having the 5 minutes of really highlighting and explaining a topic and some core things that will either resonate with individuals or not, depending on where you are individually and organizationally, to then continue that conversation the right way. So I think it's a great way just to cut through and get to the people where this can really make the biggest difference. So from a personal perspective, it's about me being very, very tight and clear in terms of what those core messages are to get over in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. Now then, my next couple of questions are questions that we ask all of our guests on the HR in Review podcast. Okay, so the following question goes as follows. If you could pass on one crucial lesson that you've learned in your HR career in 1 minute or less, geez, Bill, that's a challenge. What would your top tip be for other HR pros?
Wow, great question. Very simply, is my tip would be looking after yourself. I believe our profession is trained, maybe it's innate as well, in terms of you're always thinking about other people. And I do think if you don't think about yourself, how can you be the best people leader that you can be if you're not firing on all cylinders? Now, I'm not suggesting that we do that that we can do that every day, because we are human. So what does that mean then in terms of our wellness? What puts us in a really in a place that we're going to be able to deliver the best that we can is making sure that you've got your plan that you put in place first, and then you look to support other people. So it's very much that analogy of putting your oxygen mask on first, so that you're in a place that you can then put the oxygen mask on for your colleague in those, I'm going to say, those health and safety demos. So that for me would be my biggest tip.
Okay, awesome. I reckon that was about a minute. Good job, Kirstin. Good job.
Okay, thank you.
Now then, the next question, take a bit more time if you'd like. And the question is, what is the single biggest change that you think will happen in HR over the next 5 to 10 years? Wow, Bill, what a big question.
That's a really big question. So I believe there will be, I think there's two strands or two pillars. So one is around data and insights, and how the people function will be really strong. Actually, I'm going to say there's three pillars, actually. So data and insights, and having data to predict what's going to happen in the future as one data, as a sort of a data point to make decisions, but being able to access historical data easily. But I think that sort of that AI insights and development is definitely a big pillar and a big opportunity, I think, for us as a profession. The second piece for me would be very much around branding, around really dialing that up in terms of we are building brands. We're building brands internally in our organizations, and how do we take those out? And again, aligning those insights and course correcting through a period of time. So launching something, correcting it, checking it, is it on brand? But in a brand, the market's going to change so much. How does that really look like for a workforce that is going to be completely different, that's going to want to work in a very different way to capture and provide that brand, I'm going to say, stroke culture. And then the third piece is going to be what's the dialing up of the humanness and the, I'm going to say, sort of foundational operational pieces. And I think that humanness is going to be even more important for our profession going forward. So having the data and the insights to make decisions with foundations, that marketing, branding culture in a truly 360-degree format to support a workforce that is going to be much more flexible and much more global. And how do you make that human? I think those are the three elements that are going to be really, really critical for the future of our profession.
Perfect, thank you. And just finally for today, Kirstin, how can our listeners connect with and learn more about you? So